Welcome ladies and gentlemen to the best PvE weapon tier list in Once Human. I'm Mon, and I currently have over 3,000 hours in this game, and with those hours I'd like to share my very requested weapon tier list. But before we go into it, I'd like to put out a reminder that tier lists are opinionated, so if you agree or disagree, then do feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Also, at this point of the game, I just don't see the point of using blue or purple weapons, just simply because of their lack of strength compared to legendary weapons. So this tier list will only go over legendary weapons. This is also a PvE only tier list, so if you want to see, let's say, a purple weapon tier list or a PvP tier list, then do let me know in the comments down below. Now this tier list is separated into two, so one for single target and one for AoE, so bossing or mobbing. As for the rankings, in order of importance, the higher it is, the better it is. So S tier weapons will always be better than A tier weapons and so on. And the more to the left side of the screen the weapon is, the better it is. The more towards the right, the worse it is. So for S tier, this means a weapon is either amazing for a lot of general content, or it has its specific content where it is the best at. Then for A tier, it means the weapon is great overall, but doesn't do what S tier weapons can do. For B tier, this means the weapon is just mid. It's like usable, it'll get you through the content, but you will simply find better picks. As for C tier, it means that the weapon either needs some help or just doesn't really do what the context of the fight wants the weapon to be able to do. Then lastly, for D tier, it's just garbage, or it's just really unfit for the context of the fight. So starting with the first weapon we have in this list, which would be Abyss Glance, this is going into the C tier for the bossing tier list. The reason for this is because if you take a look at its weapon features, it requires you to hit enemies 14 times or 7 times in order to trigger Frost Vortex, which will take some time, and then, not just that, Frost Vortex itself has a small delay before spawning, and when you initially spawn Frost Vortex, it's pretty weak. It's only 30% of your psi intensity as damage, so if we take a look at the keyword description, it's 30% psi intensity for the first Frost Vortex, so that already isn't great damage, and sure, albeit it gets the 250% extra damage multiplier on the Frost Vortex damage, that only applies to the center and itself isn't enough, which is why it is in C tier for bossing. However, for the mobbing tier list, so AoE, this is going to be in B tier. And the reason for this is that it can do AoE, right? Since it's Frost Vortex, this is by default an AoE keyword. And not just that, but it can also pull enemies. So you can do some funny support build with this. But there's simply a better option. And for AoE weapons, there are better options than the Abyss Glance. Then for the Little Jaws, for the bossing tier list, this is going to be in S tier. This is literally the best weapon to use against Light Dreamers, and it's really good against just any boss in general, except the ones that are massive. But pretty much any boss in general is really great, and especially against bosses that allow you to stack up Gold Lores buffs. So for instance, if you're doing silos, you can get the Gold Lores buff along the way. Or just if you're doing Light Dreamers, for instance, it literally gives you a 1 minute and 30 seconds timer for you to prepare for the Light Dreamer to spawn. So it's really strong against situations where you can stack up your Gold Lores buffs and stuff like that. But not just that, it also gets the Shattered Maiden, which gives an extra 80% damage multiplier compared to other deviations 43%. And the Shattered Maiden can also inflict Stun Lock if the enemy isn't a great one, and will heavily slow down that enemy if it is a great one. So that's why Little Jaws for single target is going to be in S tier. However, for the AoE tier list, it's gonna sit in B tier, and the reason for this is because it doesn't have the greatest AoE range. Even if you stack AoE range on its on your mods, it's still not the greatest. There's just better options, and not just that, the explosion damage decays over its own explosion range, which does feel pretty bad. Which is why I'm going to put it in B tier. Then moving on to Jaws, for the bossing tier list, this is going to be in B tier. It's like middle of the line. It's a hybrid that doesn't have enough stats to deal enough damage to compete with the A tier weapon and S tier weapons. And this weapon kind of splits into like Unstable Bomber and your normal bullet damage, where you just want to build crit. But the thing is, funnily enough, you end up dealing more damage with your bullets, which I imagine for a weapon with a elemental keyword, you can imagine how kind of awkward that is. But yeah, not enough stats to deal enough damage compared to the other options in the list. Then for the mobbing tier list, this is going to be in B tier as well, right behind the Little Jaws for the same reason. So it has the AoE, but the range is too small just like the Little Jaws. But not just that, the unstable bomber damage that you deal with Jaws is much, much smaller than what Little Jaws can do, which is why this is behind Little Jaws. Then moving on to Brahmani, for the bossing tier list, this is like kind of inconsistent. This can be in high A tier, this can be in B tier, or even high C tier. And the reason for this is because Brahmani wants the enemy to be isolated, so the boss to be isolated. Because the reason for this is each time you trigger bounce, it'll trigger 8 bounces. But if that enemy isn't isolated and there are other enemies nearby, the bounces will just go from like one random enemy to another random enemy to another random enemy, and you can't really guarantee it to always come back and hit the boss that you wanted to hit, which is why I would just put this in B tier, to be honest. But I would actually put this above Little Jaws, just simply because of how much peak damage it can get if the boss is indeed isolated. However, for the AoE tier list, this is going to go in the A tier, thanks to its 8 bounces and obviously the 15 meters range for each bounce. So this is like a really big range. So for instance, if you're clearing Delta Silo and the boss goes into the immune phase and spawns like its mini bosses or whatever that you have to shoot down, well, bounce is amazing for this. But one reason that contributes to the Brahmani being in A tier is also because another bounce weapon simply does it better than the Brahmani. Now moving on to the next weapon, which would be the Outer Space. This is going to go in the A tier. It does great bossing. Simply, it has pretty much Boom Boom's explosion, or the built-in thunderclap, whichever you want to call it, into its weapon features, which is at like 300%, triggers every 15 shot, so every second you're going to trigger that. Only that it is going to be limited to single target, but this is a single target tier list, so this is going to do great. However, for AoE, this is definitely going to go in C tier. It has no AoE damage sources, and since now a lot of its damage comes from the Thunderclap procs, or the built-in Thunderclaps, it can also be unfortunate since you will sometimes proc the built-in Thunderclap on an already low HP enemy. And pretty much the reason why it's not in D tier is because you still have a pretty big magazine capacity for this thing, so you can just keep shooting. Then moving on to the next weapon, we have the Bingo. So for the bossing tier list, this is gonna go into B tier. Of course, this can definitely go higher, but of course that will depend on how often you hit weak spots and how often you don't hit them. But I guess I should put this above Jaws, just because of like, as long as you're consistent, you will find better results with Bingo than with Jaws. But really, there's a few things that limit this from being A, in my opinion, and the first thing is that it's kind of reliant for you to hit weak spots. If you don't hit weak spots, you lose a lot of damage. So that's what kind of sucks for the Bingo. But as long as you consistently hit weak spots, then sure, it can be argued to be put like higher into B, into high B or even A. However, in the AoE tier list, Bingo finds its place in the D tier, unfortunately, because of its low bullet count, and also because it doesn't have any AoE built in it, which honestly just warranted a D tier in the AoE tier list. Now moving on to the next weapon, we have the Kumoink. And so for the single target tier list, this thing is going to go into S tier, especially if you use Sharblade Pants. This thing's peak damage is insane for bosses that spawn enemies around them or just have a lot of enemies near them by default. Since per bounce proc, you will proc bounce bullets that go to 3 different enemies each, and if you use Sharblade Pants, you're getting essentially a total of 6 bounce bullets that'll bounce to like adjacent enemies, and those 6 bullets will bounce back to your main enemy, so that's already a ton of damage. However, if you also reload with the weapon, you also get an extra bounce trigger count, which means that instead of spawning 3 or 6, you are spawning 9 bullets that'll like pretty much 3 bullets to each enemy, so 3 to one enemy, 3 to another, and 3 to a last one. That's 9 bullets that'll also go back to your original enemy, because remember, with the Kumoink, bounce triggers a rebound on hit. It's not a random bounce that, let's say, Brahmani does, which is just, you can't really control where it goes. With the Kumoink, you can. So it's 9 bullets back into its main enemy, which is obviously really strong. And as a bonus, instead of having like the usual 30% keyword damage bonus that he gets as the last weapon feature, this one gets 75%, so more than double the amount. So this is why Kumo Ink is in S tier for single target. But of course, if the boss is isolated, you'll have to like swap your pants to the tattoo pants, and you also need to throw one turret if you're not clearing content with at least one friend, which will indeed take a bit of work. So, you know, you could argue Kumo Ink to be placed like a little bit lower, like back into the A tier. But it's not really a problem for me, since swapping between key gears isn't really a problem for me, and making turrets either. So for me, I'll just keep it in S tier for the single target tier list. Then for the AoE tier list, this is going to go into the S tier. It has the same 15 meters range that Brahmani has, so you know, it's really amazing. But every single bounce proc, like I said, gives 329 bullets to 3 enemies, which is just insane by itself, and there's not really much to explain here about why it's amazing for AoE. And at the same time, by the way, this is the bounce weapon that I was talking about that does the AoE better than Brahmani. Now, before I move on to the other weapons, I'd just like to say that if you wish to see more Once Human content or guides, then don't hesitate to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the bell for future video notifications. Now, moving on to the next weapon, we have the Last Valor. So for the bossing tier list, this is going to go into the S tier. It has its own boss, which is the best for it, which would be Manibus the Nightmare in Endless Stream servers. So that grants it an S tier. It's also really strong against the X1, since pretty much each shrapnel proc only deals damage to its weak spots. And not just that, it's also a strong option against Mannheim, since Mannheim also has multiple weak spots as well. However, for the AoE tier list, so for mobbing, this is straight up gonna go into the C tier, for the same reason as Outer Space. It has no built-in AoE, and its damage comes from its periodic shrapnel procs, which will sometimes happen on already low HP targets, which is just like unfortunate. So the Last Valor isn't really made to do AoE content. And another thing about shrapnel weapons like Last Valor is that their shrapnel-linked mods for the mask absolutely suck, which is why they're only really good at bossing, because with weapons like Last Valor, what you want to use is Targeted Strike on your mask. And obviously, Targeted Strike requires you to hit marked enemies, and you're not going to spend your time marking every enemy before shooting with your Last Valor anyway when doing AoE. So like, just don't use Last Valor for AoE content. So Last Valor pretty much loses a mask mod's core effect if you're doing AoE with it. Then moving on to the next weapon, we have the Predator, which has gotten a lot of love from the devs and has gotten double buffed ever since. So for bossing, this is going to go into the A tier. As a matter of fact, this is going to go higher than the Outer Space, of course. But pretty much, it has a lot of built-in stats to help the weapon deal lots of damage. It gains 80% weapon damage bonus really quickly, is a fast gunner weapon, so it'll get free fire rate and attack percent, and also 60% attack for most of its magazine. So this is why it warrants its A tier in the single target bossing tier list. However, another fast gunner weapon simply does it better than the Predator, which is why it's not in S tier. Albeit it is incredibly strong in single target, for AoE this is unfortunately gonna go into the C tier. It has no built-in AoE features, and if you're doing AoE, you are bound to swap between targets, and if you swap between targets, you lose half of your stacking weapon damage stacks, like the stacks that go up to 80%. Because if you read it here, it says hitting the same target consecutively grants 4% weapon damage with each hit, up to 80%, but stacks are halved when the target is changed. So pretty much no built-in AoE features. What it's pretty much got for it is a lot of ammo, so at least you can just keep shooting against AoE crowds, but the weapon also just has piss poor accuracy stats, so like with all these reasons, it's going to be in C tier for AoE. Now moving on to the hazardous object, starting with the bossing tier list, this is going to be like a B weapon or a C tier weapon. I guess I'll just put it in C tier here, because the thing with hazardous object is that it deals lots of damage per throw, since with this weapon what you want to do is you just want to throw the weapon to deal its damage. But the thing is, albeit the damage per throw is big enough to kill normal enemies, and maybe sometimes elites, it's not enough to kill bosses, which have like much more HP, and the intervals between each throw just makes this weapon like less preferable to use against bosses. Like, it'll take you more time than if you just went with the other options here. However, in the AoE tier list, this is gonna go straight up into the S tier. And actually, this is just going to go in front of the Kumwink, simply because this weapon has just so much range on its explosions, and each reload is enough to kill loads of enemies that spawn together. And not just that, this unstable bomber weapon, when you throw it, does not suffer from the same problems that little Jaws or Jaws suffer, which is the damage falloff over its own explosion distance. No, with the hazardous object, if you hit 100,000 damage on the enemy in the center of your explosion, it's the same damage throughout the entire explosion. Which is why, hazardous is just going to take the win here for the AoE tier list. And this is, by the way, what makes the Little Jaws plus Hazardous combo so strong. Your Little Jaws takes care of the single target enemies, whereas Hazardous takes care of the AoE enemies. Only downside is that this combo is just absolutely going to eat your ammo. Then moving on to the next weapon, which would be the Doombringer. This thing's going to earn its place in the A tier for the bossing tier list. Comparing it to something like Outer Space, this can be in front or behind, depends on if you're fighting the enemy from far away or from close up. If you're close up, Doombringer takes the win. If the enemy is far away, obviously Doombringer can't do anything. But pretty much this thing is like Bingo with more free stats. It also won't be awkward to use against enemies without weak spots, unlike with Bingo. And albeit it does have like less range, most of the time you're not really doing long range content in this game anyway, so this is why this warrants its A spot. It's gotten a lot of buffs. You can stack the attack percent in a single mag now, and it'll pretty much melt single target enemies, just not as hard as something like Predator. For mobbing, however, this is gonna suffer the same thing Bingo suffers. It has low magazine capacity. However, it's still gonna go into the C tier, because one thing I did forget to mention about Bingo, I think, is that Bingo, like, against AoE, you still want to hit headshots, whereas with the Doombringer, you don't really suffer much if you hit a headshot or a body shot, because Doombringer is a crit build weapon anyway. So at least it's slightly more comfortable than Bingo, and I'm just going to put it into like the low C tier. Moving on to the next weapon, which is going to be the Silent Anabasis. This thing can essentially go like, this thing is like an A or B tier weapon, right? It'll depend on if you use phantasmal turrets or not. So if you use them, this can easily find its spot into the A tier. And the reason for this is because essentially Anabasis now also not only deals Frost Vortex damage, but also gets crystals as form of damage. And each crystal is 350% psi intensity of explosion damage in like an area, which is great. So it's essentially like Abyss Glance, but like mega buffed. But not just that, if you have Phantasmal Turrets, the Phantasmal Turrets will copy the Anabasis effect and will also create crystals as well, which literally doubles your amount of 350% explosions, which is great. So that'll put in an A tier. But if you only use like the Anabasis without the turrets, whatever, this does drop down. It'll be in the middle B tier. But I'm just going to assume that you do have the resources, so I'm going to put it in the A tier for now. As for AoE, it's going to be in the A tier, pretty much for the same reasons that I listed for single target, to be honest. It has crystals as form of AoE, and it also has the Frost Vortex as form of AoE, and if you have turrets, it's even more AoE, which is great. But if you compare it to something like, let's say, Hazardous Object or Kumwink, it simply just doesn't do the same things that these two weapons can do. Or even it just doesn't compete well enough in AoE against a certain funny burn weapon that has been in the meta for 6 months now, but I'll go over that later. One extra thing though to keep in mind is that moving bosses, bosses that move a lot, will hurt Anabasis. So for instance, the Secret Servitor. Then moving on to the next weapon, we have the Compound Bow. This straight up D tier into bossing, D tier into AoE to be honest, because this thing seriously needs help. So if we take a look at its weapon features, you can gain crit rate 10% and 6 reload speed upon hitting a target, stacks up to 3 times, and upon defeating a target, you gain the maximum amount of stacks. And at max stacks, you can trigger Enhance Unstable Bomber, which is just Unstable Bomber that can crit and stagger enemies, but for PvE, there's not much point in staggering enemies. And then every shot fired increases Unstable Bomber damage by 3%, stacking up to like 6 times only. So only 18% bomber damage bonus, and hitting a weak spot has a 40% chance to automatically reload 1 crossbow bolt, which let me tell you, it feels pretty bad. Like sometimes you're just gonna not trigger this thing for a while, and you're gonna be like, is something wrong with my weapon? Like, am I doing something wrong? But no, the weapon is just dog water. Because if you kind of take a look at this is literally just Jaws, but worse. So the crit rate already doesn't really benefit your arrows very well because you're only like shooting one arrow per like reload sometimes. But not just that, Unstable Bomber doesn't exactly scale well with crit when it doesn't really give you any crit damage bonus here. It's only giving you like 30% crit rate. And not just that, the stacking Unstable Bomber damage is pitiful, man. Like, it's 3% stacking up to 6 times. Why is this not straight up just 30% Unstable Bomber damage bonus or keyword damage bonus like other weapons, let's say such as Outer Space, which is 30% shock elemental damage bonus. We also have Anabasis, which is 30% and can also get additional per Ice Crystal Shattered. Abyss Glance is 30%. Boom Boom is 30%. Like, why is this getting 3% stacking up to 6 times? Like what are we doing here? Like this weapon is just for decoration. If you're bossing with this, and assuming you're not defeating targets, so let's say hypothetically you're clearing Deep Dreamers, this is gonna feel horrible because you're not gonna trigger Unstable Bomber until you hit that enemy 3 times, and Deep Dreamers do not have weak spots. So yeah, I mean this is just a decoration weapon. Now moving to the next one, we have the Conflicting Memories. This is going to go into the A tier. And actually, I would put this for bossing above the Anabasis. So for instance, if you're creating Manibus the Nightmare, this goes up, but definitely not as good as Last Valor. But the problem with this is because of its weapon features, which I'll go over right now. If you take a look at the second weapon feature, for every 32 magazine capacity, parts hit by shrapnel +1 up to 5. So this thing by default wants to hit at least 5 parts hit by shrapnel. And if you use the cage helmet, it's shrapnel trigger count +1, so it'll double those parts hit, which essentially allows you to proc shrapnel 10 times. But the problem with this is that shrapnel weapons get mega buffed, or like get a lot of strength, if their shrapnel hit weak spot parts. And the problem with that is that there isn't enemies in this game that have enough parts for the Conflicting Memories to fully benefit from it. So that's why Conflicting Memories, albeit it like the stats look low-key juicy, it won't perform that well because a lot of these parts are just gonna go into like normal body parts. Because do remember, if the enemy doesn't have multiple weak spots, well, shrapnel does not hit the same part that your original bullet hit. So even if, let's say, you hit a non-weak spot part with your normal bullet, only one of your shrapnel is going to hit a weak spot part, which hurts Conflicting Memories. But even then, don't get me wrong, against enemies with only a single weak spot, it'll still do great. But in the AoE tier list, this is definitely gonna go in the C tier for the same reasons as the weapons in front of it. Or actually, I guess this should be in front of the Doombringer because it has more magazine capacity. But essentially, all of these weapons do not have built-in AoE weapon features. Now moving on to the Corrosion, in the bossing tier list, this is going to go into the B tier, but higher than Jaws. Since pretty much Corrosion is just a Jaws, but with much more stats. So if we compare them both, if we just take a look at Corrosion, it's a 70% chance to trigger Power Surge per hit. Power Surge can deal crit hits with 15% crit rate. When Power Surge is triggered, you get 15% crit damage for Power Surge, stacking up to 10 times, so 150% free crit damage for Power Surge, and also 15% Power Surge damage bonus by default. Whereas with the Jaws, oh, by the way, I forgot to compare fire rate, but this is 180 and this is 190, so pretty much the same fire rate. Jaws triggers Unstable Bomber every 2 to 3 hits. Hitting a weak spot grants 30% blast damage bonus, so if you don't hit weak spots, you lose that as well. And not only that, Unstable Bomber can crit, of course. They're both hybrid weapons, but this one only gets 25% crit rate and no crit damage bonus. So Corrosion is just a hybrid weapon like Jaws, just with much more stats. So this is going to go into the B tier. But don't forget, Corrosion is getting a rework of some sort or buffs. So hopefully this does jump up in the tier list. However, for the AoE, This is going to go into the mid C to high C since it doesn't have any built-in AoE features. But it's going to be higher than this, for instance, especially Doombringer, since Doombringer only gets 4 bullets, whereas Corrosion gets like 18, 19. So yeah, Corrosion is going to be mid C to high C, depends on how you see it. One thing I must say with the Corrosion is that if you're doing like killing normal enemies with the Corrosion, like AoE stuff, and you are doing content with someone else that runs any other power surge weapon, you are going to lose some damage. And the reason for this is because Corrosion's mask mod, First Electrocution, is 30% power surge ultimate damage for enemies without power surge status. But if you have a teammate that runs any other power surge weapons, they will apply the power surge status, so you're just going to end up losing damage. So, of course, Corrosion is going to go down a notch if you are playing with someone that uses any other power surge weapons. But if not, this is just going to be here anyway. Then moving on to the next weapon, we have Critical Pulse. So for the bossing, this is just straight up going to go into the low B. It feels like it can do single target damage, like it's fine, it's mid. However, it's still pretty painful if you just compare it to like other weapons in this list right here. However, for the mobbing tier list, so for the AoE, this is going to go into high A. To be honest, I would put this like above the Anabasis. And the reason for this is just its AoE damage is just pretty insane. Albeit, I guess it is limited by needing to get the orb first. So you could like argue to put Anabasis in front or Critical Pulse in front, depending on how you see it. But Critical Pulse is definitely really good for AoE. It just unfortunately doesn't do the same thing that Hazardous or Kumuing can do. Then for the next weapon, we have Primal Rage. And for the bossing tier list, this is obviously going to go into the S tier. If you compare it to other weapons, this can move up or move down depending on the specific enemy that you're fighting. But essentially, Primal Rage, no need to reload, 80% weapon damage bonus, key gear that allows it to trigger extra bullets at 40% rate per shot. It's a fast gunner weapon, so free fire rate and free attack percent. It's just going to be S tier. I guess I should also mention that depending on how you see it, if you also value survivability, like if you often go down, this Primal Rage will also take a hit. And the reason for this is because if you use this weapon, you're going to be like sitting at a really low HP. And if you're low HP, well, let's say like an enemy breathes at you wrong, then you die. So do keep that in mind. But for me, I'm going to put this in S tier. As for the AoE capabilities of this weapon, this is going to go into the low B. Albeit it does not have any AoE weapon features. Don't forget that this thing doesn't need to reload. So this thing literally, like if you have a crowd of enemies, you just keep shooting. Whereas with all of these weapons, eventually you're going to have to reload. So that's why this thing, albeit without AoE features, it still gets a B, just a low B rating. Then for the Memento, this is going to be in the A tier, but this is going to be like up here. So Memento could be in front of Predator or could be behind. Depends on how comfortable you are with using a pistol. If you consistently hit your shots, this thing will go in front of Predator. But if you're not comfortable with using a pistol and you often miss your shots, this is just going to stay here. And the reason for its strength is, if we take a look at the weapon features, you hit a weak spot, 80% fast gunner trigger chance, which is like really high. When you trigger fast gunner, you restore 1 bullet, which is nice. Every one of your shots has a 50% chance to consume 1 more bullet and gain plus 100% attack. So you just deal double damage. And if the shot misses, the next reload loads 1 extra bullet. So that's like if you start missing shots. But another thing is its keyword, which is when you trigger fast gunner, you get a 70% chance to automatically reload 1 bullet, and that reloaded bullet also gains an extra 20% attack. So with those stats in mind, Memento gains a lot of strength. And of course, let's not forget, this is a fast gunner weapon. Fast gunner weapons are designed for single target scenarios. However, in the mobbing tier list, this is straight up going to go into the D tier. Albeit, I guess one thing I should do is put this in front of Bingo. And the reason for this is because Bingo, if you miss your shot, it's wasted essentially. But with the Memento, if you waste a shot, it gives you at least some guarantee that the next magazine will have more bullets in its mag. So that's like, at least you have a quality of life with Memento over Bingo. Then moving on to the next weapon, we have Pyroclasm Shotgun. So for the bossing tier list, deadass, this is just gonna go into C tier. Now this could go in front of like Hazardous or maybe even Abyss Glance, but because of personal beef, I'm just gonna keep it here. And the reason for this is because this is a weird hybrid where its main focus is its special bullet damage, which are the Dragon Breath ammo. However, that big load of damage from the Dragon Breath ammo is locked behind hitting enemies, getting the orbs, then reloading. And don't forget, if you swap weapons, you also lose those special bullet damage, so you're gonna do the entire thing again. And in case you haven't like realized, that means that it's extra requirement for you to get your kukri buffs, and if you want to mark your enemies, you have to mark your enemies first, and then swap to the Pyroclasm, shoot once or shoot a few times to get an orb, and then quickly reload, which by then, it's not hard to imagine, you're already losing a lot of uptime from your supportive weapons buffs. So this is why it gets the C tier, albeit it can go higher because it still has the Pyro Dino as a slight saving grace, which gives it 1200% psi intensity of explosion damage from here and there. Now for the mobbing, I'm just going to put this in C tier as well. No built-in AoE, pellets can hit multiple targets for its like small burn damage, and Dino does give it some AoE with explosions, but like I could put it up a little bit, but I'm just going to keep it here in case the devs hopefully buff it and it gets like a nice glow up. Moving on to the next weapon, which is the Raining Cash. This for bossing, this is gonna go into B essentially. For mobbing, this is gonna go into D. It is literally a competitor to Doombringer, but weaker in every aspect. So if we take a look at the weapon features, reloading triggers Fortress Warfare, okay, so 20% weapon damage bonus. Doombringer is Bullseye, which is 16% vulnerability, which by the way is stronger than weapon damage bonus. While in Fortress Warfare with the Raining Cash, you gain 5% attack every 0.5 seconds, stacking up to 8 times, so 40% attack. So to get your attack, this will take a bit of time, but with the Doombringer, it's 12% attack per shot, up to 3 stacks, so you're getting 36%. Sure, you have a less peak, but you're getting it so much quicker. So Doomer just literally does it better in my opinion. Then you get 30% crit rate while in Fortress Warfare. This you also get 30% crit rate when hitting marked targets. You get some damage reduction here with 30% when you're in Fortress Warfare. You get up to 20% damage reduction with the Doombringer. But pretty much for PV, this thing is just better. Like Doombringer is just the big brother of Raining Cash, literally. Like Doombringer just gets its buffs so much quicker than the Raining Cash. And Doombringer is, in case you've never used the Raining Cash, this is like a weapon that shoots periodically, which can be kind of weird if you've never used it. But like for these reasons and the reasons stated previously, Doombringer is just better than the Raining Cash. But now let's end it with the cherry on top, the Boom Boom. So for single target, obviously this goes into the S tier thanks to the Pyro Dino, which gives it a 1200% psi intensity of explosion every like 2-3 seconds, whatever. And on its own, it has a burn, which is a very good overtime dot damage source. And it also has the 300% psi intensity of explosion damage that you can get the moment you shoot at a target. So this obviously grants its S tier. Honestly, I'm just gonna put this like in front of everything just because of like how much easier it is to use and how much it is like insane for the general content. Like sure, albeit Little Jaws is the best weapon for Deep Dreamers, Last Valor is the best weapon for Manibus the Nightmare, Boom Boom just has so many things going for it that I'm just gonna put it all the way on top. Now for mobbing, this of course with all the previous things I've said, 1200% psi intensity of explosion plus its own explosion every 2 seconds. This is just gonna go into the S tier again. However, one thing I will say is it will go over the Kumwink, but will not be better than the Hazardous. Hazardous explosion range is still better than Boom Boom's. Like Boom Boom, yes, Boom Boom gets a very far explosion range, but Hazardous still does it better. And Hazardous like explosion deals much more damage than Boom Boom's. And albeit if you pull out the Pyro Deviation, your explosion gains more damage, but against AoE enemies, usually they don't have that much HP. And Hazardous can just do its damage very well without a deviation. So this is why I'm going to keep Hazardous on top in the AoE tier list. But this is it for this tier list. If you have any questions or wish to see more Once Human content or guides, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments down below. This is Mon, peace out.